The summer sun hung lazily over Greenwood Park, casting long shadows from the tall oaks that lined the walking paths. Birds chirped overhead, and the air was filled with the sounds of laughter and the occasional bark from a playful dog. Ethan, with his favorite blue cap turned backward, was just finishing up a game of catch with his friend, Caleb. They had been at it for hours, and their energy was finally starting to wane. "One more throw," Caleb called, tossing the ball back to Ethan with a tired smile. Ethan caught it with ease. But as he glanced around, something caught his eye. A little girl sat alone on a nearby bench, her small hands folded tightly in her lap. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, with her blonde hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her clothes, though neat, seemed a little worn, and there was a hint of sadness in her gaze as she stared into the distance. "Who's that?" Ethan asked, nodding toward the girl. Caleb followed his gaze and shrugged. "No idea. Haven't seen her around before." Ethan tossed the ball back absent-mindedly. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The girl's shoulders were hunched, and she looked lonely. Even from a distance, Ethan could sense it. He had always been the type to notice things others didn't, whether it was a friend having a rough day or a neighbor who needed help carrying groceries. "Maybe she's waiting for someone," Caleb suggested. He stretched his arms, already looking toward his bike. "Yeah, maybe," Ethan muttered, but he found himself still watching her. Just then, a man appeared from behind one of the trees, a tall, thin figure with tired eyes and a slightly worn-out look. He approached the girl, placing a hand on her shoulder. She flinched slightly, but he didn't seem to notice. He handed her a bottle of water and said something too quiet for Ethan to hear. "Let's go, Ethan," Caleb called, tugging at his arm. Ethan nodded, but as he turned, he caught something out of the corner of his eye. The girl, her hands now loosely holding the bottle, made a small, barely visible gesture. Her hand, held close to her body, curled in a subtle wave. It was so quick and faint that anyone else might have missed it. But Ethan felt a strange pull in his chest. "Wait," he whispered, stopping in his tracks. "Did you see that?" "See what?" Caleb asked, a little annoyed. Ethan's mind raced. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like he had just seen a silent plea, a hidden cry for help. Ethan couldn't shake the image of the girl's subtle hand gesture. Even as he and Caleb rode their bikes home, the thought lingered, gnawing at him. She hadn't looked afraid exactly, but there was something about her that seemed off. The man with her hadn't seemed cruel. But Ethan couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. When he got home, his mom was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The smell of fresh basil and garlic filled the air, but Ethan hardly noticed. "Mom?" he asked, leaning against the counter. She glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "What's on your mind, honey?" Ethan hesitated, unsure how to put his thoughts into words without sounding dramatic. "There was this girl at the park today," he started slowly, "and she looked sad. Really sad." His mother set down her knife, giving him her full attention. "What do you mean?" "There was a man with her. But when he walked away," she made this weird hand gesture. "I don't know how to describe it, but it felt like, I don't know, like she was asking for help." His mom's expression softened, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. She had always trusted Ethan's instincts, knowing he was a careful and observant kid. "Did you see anything that made you think she was in danger?" "No, not really," Ethan admitted, feeling a little unsure now that he was talking about it out loud. "It just felt strange, that's all, like she wasn't supposed to be there." His mom nodded, wiping her hands on a towel. "Sometimes, our instincts pick up on things before we fully understand them," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe we could go back tomorrow and see if she's there again. If you're worried, we can always talk to someone." Ethan felt a wave of relief. Just knowing that his mom took him seriously helped ease the knot in his stomach. "Yeah," he said, feeling a little more confident. "I'd like that." The next day, after school, Ethan and his mom returned to the park. The playground was busy with kids, parents, and dog walkers, but there was no sign of the girl or her guardian. Ethan's mom looked around thoughtfully, her gaze drifting over the benches and picnic tables. "Maybe it was just a one-time thing," she suggested. "She could have been visiting. Or maybe they came at a different time today." Ethan nodded, but disappointment lingered. He had wanted some kind of confirmation, something that would make sense of his strange feeling. But as the days passed, he didn't see her again, and slowly, He started to let go of the incident, until 1 week later, he saw her again. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Ethan was back at Greenwood Park, this time with his younger sister, Lily, who had begged him to take her to the playground. While Lily ran off to the swings, Ethan scanned the park out of habit, and that's when he saw her, sitting on the same bench, hands folded tightly in her lap. The same man, her guardian, was with her. He seemed tired, his shoulders hunched as he looked at his phone. Ethan felt a strange rush of nerves, like he was seeing something secret, something he wasn't supposed to notice. He tried to act casual, keeping a bit of distance as he wandered over to a nearby tree, pretending to look around for Lily. Out of the corner of his eye, he watched the girl. This time, she looked even more withdrawn, her gaze fixed on the ground. Her hands were clenched together, her knuckles white. Then, as if sensing him nearby, she looked up, her eyes met his, and for a second, Ethan saw a glimmer of recognition, like she remembered him from last time. She didn't wave or say anything, but her expression shifted, and she made the same subtle hand gesture as before. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. It was the exact same signal, a small, almost hidden wave with her hand pressed close to her body. It was as if she was reaching out, hoping someone would notice. Without thinking, Ethan stepped back, feeling a surge of determination. He took out his phone and snapped a quick photo of the girl and the man, just in case. Then he went to find Lily and told her it was time to go. As they walked home, Ethan's mind raced. He knew he couldn't just ignore what he'd seen. This wasn't just his imagination, he was sure of it now. He needed to tell his mom, and this time, he was ready to take it further if he had to. Back at home, Ethan's heart pounded as he explained everything to his mom. She listened intently, her face growing more serious with every detail. When he showed her the photo he'd taken, her expression shifted to one of quiet determination. "You did the right thing, Ethan," she said. "This might be nothing, but we need to make sure. Sometimes kids are in situations that adults don't notice or don't know how to handle. If that girl is reaching out for help, we have to listen." Ethan's mom made a call to the non-emergency police line, explaining the situation calmly but clearly. She told them about the girl's behavior, Ethan's instincts, and how he had seen her twice now, looking distressed and making a signal that seemed to ask for help. The dispatcher took down the information, thanking her for reporting it. After the call, Ethan felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Part of him worried that he'd been wrong, that he'd overreacted and dragged his mom into something that was nothing more than a misunderstanding. But another part of him felt validated, like he was doing something important. His mom had trusted him, and now someone who could actually help would look into it. The next day, an officer stopped by their home to gather more information. He was a tall man with a kind face, and he knelt down to talk to Ethan at eye level, putting him at ease. "So, Ethan," the officer began, "tell me more about what you saw. You said she made a hand gesture. Can you show me what it looked like?" Ethan demonstrated, holding his hand close to his body and giving a small, subtle wave. The officer nodded thoughtfully. "That's actually a known signal," he said. "It's a way some people ask for help without drawing too much attention. You're very observant for noticing it, Ethan. Most kids wouldn't have." Ethan felt a surge of pride, but also a growing sense of worry for the girl. "Do you think she's okay?" "We're going to find out," the officer reassured him. "We'll keep an eye out at the park, and we have resources to look into her situation. We take things like this seriously." Over the next few days, Ethan's life returned to its usual routine. Though he thought about the girl often, he couldn't help but wonder if she was safe, if the police had found her, or if she was still somewhere out there, waiting for someone to notice. A week later, Ethan's mom received a call from the officer they'd spoken to. She listened quietly, occasionally glancing over at Ethan, who sat nearby, fidgeting with his hands. After she hung up, she turned to him, her face a mix of relief and sadness. "They found her," she said softly. Ethan's heart leapt. "Is she okay?" "Yes," his mom assured him, though her eyes held a hint of sorrow. "They found the girl and her guardian, Mr. Whitaker. It turns out he's been struggling. He wasn't abusive, but he was overwhelmed and having a hard time taking care of her properly. The police said that he didn't have any support, and he was doing his best, but he was neglecting her without even realizing how serious it had become." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. What's going to happen to her? She's going to stay with a foster family for a little while. His mom explained, someplace where she can feel safe and cared for. And Mr. Whitaker is going to get help too. They're setting him up with therapy and connecting him to people who can support him. He loves her. Ethan, he just needs some help himself. Ethan nodded slowly, processing everything. Part of him felt relieved, knowing that the girl would be taken care of. But another part of him felt a deep sadness, realizing how close she had come to slipping through the cracks. Did I really make a difference? He asked quietly. His mom placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You absolutely did, Ethan, because you paid attention and cared enough to speak up. That little girl is getting a second chance. Sometimes, one person's kindness and bravery is all it takes to change someone's life. Ethan nodded, feeling a swell of pride and gratitude. He knew now that courage didn't always look like fighting or facing down danger. Sometimes, courage was about speaking up, even when you weren't sure, and trusting that your instincts could make a difference. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's story spread quietly through the neighborhood. Some of his classmates had heard bits and pieces, and a few teachers even praised him subtly in class, thanking him for his attentiveness without giving away too many details. One afternoon, as Ethan was walking home, he noticed a familiar face at the edge of the playground. It was the police officer who had first talked to him, standing with Mr. Whitaker, who looked more at ease than before. The officer gave Ethan a small nod, a silent gesture of acknowledgement and thanks. Mr. Whitaker approached Ethan, his face lined with gratitude. Thank you, he said, his voice a little shaky. I know you did something very important for Rosie. I didn't know how much I needed help until now. Ethan nodded, unsure of what to say. He felt a warmth in his chest, realizing the impact of his actions. I just wanted her to be okay, he said simply. Mr. Whitaker nodded, a small, grateful smile on his face. Thanks to you, she is. Ethan watched as Mr. Whitaker walked away, feeling a sense of calm and fulfillment. He had done something good, something that mattered, and as he continued on his way, he knew that he'd never forget the lessons he'd learned, that kindness, courage, and a community's willingness to help could truly make a difference in someone's life. The days slowly turned into weeks, and life in Greenwood Park returned to normal. Ethan still visited the park often, but now he looked at it with new eyes, seeing it as more than just a playground. It was a place where small gestures and silent cries could hold enormous meaning, where people could connect without saying a word. One Saturday afternoon, as he walked through the park with his mom, he noticed a small girl playing on the swings. She was laughing, her face full of joy, and by her side was a woman who seemed kind and caring. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. It was Rosie. She looked so much happier, surrounded by other kids, her laughter filling the air. Ethan's mom noticed too, and they both paused to watch her for a moment. She looks like she's doing well, his mom said with a smile. Yeah, Ethan replied, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. She really does. Just then, Rosie spotted them. For a moment, her expression changed, as if she recognized Ethan. She stared, her eyes wide with curiosity and maybe even gratitude. Ethan felt his cheeks flush, but he smiled and gave her a little wave. She waved back, a big, happy wave that held none of the tension and fear he'd seen in her before. The woman with her, Rosie's foster mom, noticed their interaction and walked over, extending a hand to Ethan's mom. Hi, I'm Mrs. Morrison. She introduced herself with a warm smile. I understand you and your son had a big part in helping Rosie. I just wanted to thank you. From the bottom of my heart. Ethan's mom shook her hand, smiling. We're just glad she's safe and happy, she said, glancing down at Ethan with pride. Mrs. Morrison turned to Ethan, her eyes filled with gratitude. Rosie talks about a kind boy she met at the park who noticed her and cared enough to help. She doesn't know much, but she feels like she has a friend out there who's looking out for her. Ethan felt a surge of emotion, and he nodded, feeling a deep connection to Rosie despite the briefness of their encounters. I'm glad she's okay, he said sincerely. After a few more words of thanks, Mrs. Morrison took Rosie by the hand, and they headed toward the playground. Ethan and his mom stayed for a little while longer, watching as Rosie played, her laughter ringing out like a melody. The next time Ethan visited the park, Rosie was there again, playing with a group of kids. This time, she ran over to him with a smile. her face lighting up with recognition. "Hi, I remember you," she said brightly, her voice full of warmth. Ethan grinned back, a little surprised but happy. "Hey, Rosie, how are you?" "I'm really good," she replied, her eyes shining. "Mrs. Morrison is really nice. She helps me with my homework. And we bake cookies together." "That sounds awesome," Ethan said, feeling genuinely happy for her. He could see that Rosie was thriving in her new environment, her spirit growing stronger each day. As they talked, a few other kids from the playground joined them, curious about their new friend. Soon, Ethan found himself playing an impromptu game of tag with Rosie and the others, running and laughing as they chased each other around the park. It was as if they'd been friends forever. By the time they all sat down on a nearby bench, exhausted but happy, Rosie looked up at Ethan with a serious expression. "Thank you," she said softly, "for helping me." Ethan felt a lump in his throat, but he managed a smile. "Anytime, Rosie. That's what friends are for." The impact of Ethan's actions didn't just change Rosie's life, it transformed his own. He had learned that sometimes, even small gestures could make a world of difference. His mom often reminded him how brave he had been, trusting his instincts even when he wasn't sure. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, his mom looked at him thoughtfully. "Ethan, you've always had a big heart. But what you did for Rosie, that was something truly special. It takes courage to speak up when you're unsure." Ethan shrugged, but he felt a deep sense of pride. "I just wanted to help," he said. "It didn't feel like a big deal." "That's exactly why it's so important," his mom replied, giving him a gentle smile. "Kindness isn't always about doing big things. Sometimes, it's about noticing the small things that others might overlook." Over time, Ethan became a quiet hero in his community. His classmates and friends looked up to him, not because he was the loudest or the most popular, but because he was kind, observant, and brave. His teachers often noticed his willingness to help others and encourage them, especially those who seemed lonely or left out. Ethan continued to visit the park, sometimes running into Rosie and her foster family, sometimes just watching the world go by, grateful for the chance he'd had to make a difference. A year later, Greenwood Park still held the memories of that summer. Ethan was a little older now, a little wiser, but he never forgot the lesson he'd learned. The park had become a special place for him, a reminder of the power of empathy and courage. One sunny afternoon, Ethan was sitting on a bench when he saw Rosie and Mrs. Morrison walking toward him. Rosie was carrying a small potted plant with delicate flowers. "Hi, Ethan," she called, her face beaming with joy. "I wanted to give you something." She handed him the plant, her eyes shining. "It's for you. To say thank you for being my friend and helping me." Ethan took the plant, feeling a wave of emotion. "Thank you, Rosie. I'll take care of it. Just like you." Rosie grinned, and for a moment, they stood in silence, appreciating the friendship they had built. Then, with a quick hug, Rosie and Mrs. Morrison headed home, leaving Ethan with a small but powerful reminder of everything they'd been through together. As he looked at the plant, Ethan knew it would always remind him of Rosie, of the summer that changed everything, and of the lesson he'd carry with him forever. Sometimes, one small act of kindness could transform a life, and in doing so, transform your own. As time passed, Ethan's experience with Rosie continued to inspire those around him. News of his story had spread quietly through the community, reaching friends, neighbors, and even teachers at school who admired his compassion and bravery. It wasn't just Rosie's life that had been touched. Ethan's actions had sparked a ripple effect that encouraged others to look out for one another in small but meaningful ways. One day, his homeroom teacher, Mrs. Turner, stopped him after class. She was a soft-spoken woman, known for her gentle manner and kind smile. "Ethan," she began, "I just wanted to let you know how proud I am of you. Not many kids your age would have had the awareness or the courage to do what you did. You showed all of us that even small actions can make a difference." Ethan felt a bit embarrassed but also proud. "Thanks, Mrs. Turner. I guess I thought she needed help, and I didn't want to ignore it." She nodded, her eyes warm. "And because of that, you've inspired others. I've seen classmates offering to help one another more, and even standing up for kids who might feel alone. You've shown everyone what it means to be compassionate." As Ethan left her classroom, he couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose. He hadn't set out to change anything except Rosie's situation. But now he realized that kindness could be contagious. He decided he wanted to keep looking for ways to help others, even in small ways. One afternoon, several months after that first encounter in Greenwood Park, Ethan was surprised to see Mrs. Morrison and Rosie at his front door. They were holding a small bouquet of flowers and a thank you card. Mrs. Morrison smiled warmly, handing the card to Ethan's mom, while Rosie held out the flowers with a proud grin. "These are for you, Ethan," Rosie said, her voice cheerful. "Thank you for everything." Ethan took the flowers, feeling a lump form in his throat. "You didn't have to do this," he said, smiling at Rosie. "I'm just glad you're happy." Mrs. Morrison looked at Ethan's mom, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I know we've said thank you before, but I wanted to tell you how much this means to us. Rosie is doing so well now, and I have no doubt that it's because someone cared enough to step in when she needed it most." Ethan's mom invited them inside, and they all sat down to share stories over cookies and lemonade. Rosie talked about her new school, her friends, and the art classes she'd started taking. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she described her latest drawing, a picture of a big, colorful garden filled with all kinds of flowers. As they said their goodbyes, Mrs. Morrison gave Ethan's mom a long, heartfelt hug. "You and Ethan have restored my faith in people," she said softly. "I'll always be grateful for your kindness." When they left, Ethan felt lighter than he had in months. He realized that helping Rosie hadn't just changed her life, it had changed his too. He had found a deeper understanding of himself, of the importance of compassion, and of the impact even a small act of kindness could have. Inspired by his experience, Ethan began volunteering at a local community center with his mom. They spent time helping organize events for children and families, and Ethan found joy in working with others to make the community a better place. He even started a small project at school, gathering classmates to donate books and toys for kids in need. One evening, his mom asked him if he'd ever thought about what he wanted to do when he grew up. Ethan thought about it, reflecting on everything he'd learned from helping Rosie. "I think I want to keep helping people," he replied. "Maybe become a counselor, or someone who helps kids in tough situations. I want to be there for people, just like I was for Rosie." His mom's eyes filled with pride, and she reached out to give him a hug. "You've already made a difference, Ethan. Whatever you decide to do, I know you'll keep making the world a better place." Years passed, but the impact of Ethan's actions never faded. Rosie stayed in touch, visiting him occasionally and sending updates on her life. She grew into a strong, confident young woman, and every time they spoke, Ethan felt a deep sense of pride in knowing he had played a part in her journey. Ethan's story became something of a local legend, inspiring other kids to look out for one another and trust their instincts. Teachers used his story as an example of kindness and bravery, encouraging students to be aware of their surroundings and speak up when they sensed someone needed help. As Ethan grew older, he never forgot the lesson he'd learned that summer. He carried it with him, a quiet reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures could have the biggest impact. And every time he visited Greenwood Park, he would look around, remembering that one moment that had changed everything. Even as an adult, he would walk by the bench where he had first seen Rosie, feeling a wave of gratitude for the chance he'd had to make a difference. Because of that experience, he knew that compassion and courage could truly transform lives, and he was determined to live by those values, spreading kindness wherever he went. Decades later, Ethan returned to Greenwood Park with his own children. They played on the swings, laughing and chasing each other just as he had done so many years ago. As he watched them, he noticed a young girl sitting alone on a bench nearby, her face hidden behind a book. A feeling of déjà vu washed over him. Ethan walked over, sitting a respectful distance away, and offered her a gentle smile. She looked up, and he recognized that same look of loneliness he'd once seen in Rosie. He didn't say anything, but as he watched her, he hoped she'd find the friends and support she needed, just as Rosie had. As he walked back to his children, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. The story had come full circle, and he knew that he had done his part to make the world a little kinder, a little brighter, for those who needed it most. And as he looked out over Greenwood Park, he knew that the lessons of compassion, courage, and kindness would live on, passed from one generation to the next, creating a legacy of hope and connection that would never fade.